All right, so I'm going to start off with the fact that um, I've got my work folder that I normally keep stuff in, and um, so I've got a software demos folder for this. I'm going to treat it like a project. And this has got kind of my basic setup. I've already got a project in here because this is the one I did with the prior class, but I'm going to do another one and drop it in the same folder. So, but, you know, just to reiterate, I do keep, I keep an audio folder that I can put sound effects and music in. I keep a footage folder, which is generally my video. Graphics are AI, PSD layered files, photos, and then I keep a process folder. So if I've got storyboards, style frames, that kind of stuff, a lot of time I'll keep it in there as well, just because it's kind of nice having the storyboards handy when you start an animation, because you can take them into After Effects and you can kind of create a little animatic to kind of time out where things are going to happen. So just in the interest of keeping everything together and all in one place, that's kind of the way I do it. For every project folder, I encourage you to keep at least an audio folder, footage, graphics, and photos. If you do nothing else, do those folders. So that just kind of helps keep things organized, and you can kind of mirror that within After Effects. So I've also got, bless you, just point out real quick that I've also got, I've got After Effects open, and I've also got Media Encoder, Adobe Media Encoder. So we'll do our animations, we'll do our work, but the only way we have to show it to anybody really is to render it out into an MP4 file. And we can do that out of either After Effects or Media Encoder, and I'll show you both ways when I'm done. So let's see, go to After Effects. Why do I have Photoshop open? Oh, and let's save. Let's quit Photoshop. I like just to keep After Effects open, or as few programs open as I can generally manage. So I'm going to start a new project because I want an entirely fresh setup. So new project, save it. All right, so I got a new project, and I'm just going to go ahead and save this real quick so that I can, good, it dropped right into my folder. So to demo, right? Okay. And this will just save it right alongside of all my other stuff. So, all right. Empty interface. We went over this last week. The video from that is up on Canvas. So, but basically what I'm going to do here is we're going to look at, we're going to start off with just primitive shapes, and we're going to animate like square, circle, that kind of stuff. I'm going to use a square. We're going to create multiple compositions because a very common practice, pretty much a standard practice, is to, break your animation down into manageable parts, because an animation can get really kind of complicated, and by the time we start setting keyframes and setting our slow in, slow out, timing things, if we try to keep everything in one file, in one, animation timeline and layer, they'll get really kind of confusing. And you can break almost everything down into elements. So consider the example that I had last week, the RV show video. I had a lot of different compositions in there sitting inside of my main compositions for things like simple graphics, like that puff, that circle that I small short little animation that I placed into my composition, staggered it a little, multiple times, staggered it to give sort of a triple bump effect, those kinds of things. Break things down into simple objects. If I've got a book that I'm going to animate, and a simple animation, maybe it's just, I draw this shape and it's just the outline draws on the screen. But I know that I also want to be able to sort of float that around my workspace, or maybe pop it in from the bottom and have it, settle. I could create the book with just doing the little outline animation, but then I can take that composition, put it into my main composition, and then I can apply other animations to that without affecting the initial outline animation. So it allows us to kind of layer things, scale things, especially reusable elements, which you'll have a lot of. So that's kind of what we're going to look at here. And then just some of the basics of working with shapes and objects. So that'll run through probably close to an hour, and then the balance of class will be time to work on your designer spotlight presentations. So I've got my workspace, and the first thing I need some place to work. So I need compositions, right? So I know that I'm going to make a 10-second animation. That's going to be my main final output. So I'm going to create that composition. So I'm just going to click New Composition, and I want to make it 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames a second, and I'm going to give it a name, and I'm just going to name it main animation. So I always know what my main is. Main animation, 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames, and it's already set to 10 seconds because that's what I set last time. So I'm all set up. So it's 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames a second for 10 seconds, for a duration of 10 seconds. This is the only composition that I'm going to try to make sure is the exact length of my final animation. If I know I need to create a 30-second TV spot or a 15-second social media spot, making my composition that size simplifies and streamlines everything. The other compositions that I make that I'm going to use in this, doesn't really matter how long they are. They can be longer than, they can be shorter than. Most of the time, I try to make them shorter than so that they're easier to manage on screen. The sizes can be different. My final composition is 1920 by 1080, but that doesn't mean that every element in there has to be that size. I'm actually going to make our first element, the square animation that we're going to do, I'm actually going to make it 1080 square, because it's going to be basically a contained square type of composition. So it can be whatever size I need it to be. I might even make it bigger than maybe I make it 1080 times 2, so 2160 square, so that it's plenty big and I can do all sorts of different things with it. It doesn't matter for the embedded compositions. What does matter on the embedded compositions is the frame rate. If my final composition frame rate's 24 frames a second, all of my others need to be 24 frames a second. So I've got my main composition here. I'll create that, and it drops it over here into my project menu panel. I am using the standard workspace. So there's my main animation. And then I'm going to create a second animation for my little square that I'm going to do here. So I'm going to make that one I can either come down here to this little gray box with the colored shapes, or I can come up to the composition menu and create a new composition. Just Command N on my keyboard. So we'll create a new composition. And like I said, I'm purposely going to make this one a different size. It's going to be, instead of 1920 by 1080, it's going to be 1080 by 1080. For now, I'm going to leave it at 10 seconds for the time being. I can change this later. I want to make sure that it's 24 frames a second because that's the frame rate of my final composition. So we need to keep those the same. You can get away with, when you start working with video, just as an aside, when we start working with video and then using video in our compositions, if we're doing a 24 frame per second composition, but our video's 30 frames a second, After Effects will actually do a pretty decent job of reinterpreting that footage. But when we're working with compositions, that's wholly within our control, so we should try to keep them consistent, all right? There are also ways to interpret footage to different frame rates, but that's for a later day. So we've got this, and this composition, I'm gonna name this composition, animated square, because that's what it's going to be. So the process that I'm going to sort of follow here is I'm going to animate the square, then I'm going to embed it in my final composition, and I'm going to use it multiple times and make adjustments to it in that composition. So I'm going to say okay and accept that. So there's my square composition. Pretty easy so far. All of it's actually pretty easy. Once you get the hang of it and understand the basics, we just start building on top of these things from here on out. So I've got this composition, the square composition, and I'm going to put, like I said, we're going to focus more on raw shapes for right now. So, you know, if come up here to my tools, rectangle, ellipse, polygon, I'm going to use a square because it's going to make it easier to see some of the things I do than a circle will. But, yeah.
How did you open the drop-down menu of several options for the shapes?
If you just click and hold, it'll pop up. All right, so we got our square, and I'm going to do some, normally whenever I start working with something, I usually kind of try to center stuff up in my space. It depends on what I'm working on, obviously, but I'm building an individual element here that, you know, I have a very real purpose for. And actually what I want it to do is, this square is going to animate in a way that it's going to kind of pop into existence and then settle down into a final size or state. A simple kind of a thing. Mostly scale is what we're going to do. So I generally want stuff centered up. I'm going to, on purpose though, draw this off center. So, and just like other Adobe apps, if I hold down my Shift key when I do this, I'll constrain the shape to a perfect square. If I'm using an ellipse tool, it would be a perfect circle, etc. So here's my shape. And it's red because that's the color of the last one I made. I can change this to, let's change this one to blue, just so that it's different. I make this sort of an off blue. Within my standard workspace, this color can be adjusted by either here in the control bar, in my properties panel. As long as I have the shape selected, I'll see all of my different controls and transforms for that over here. There's the color, I can set stroke or whatever. And then there's also, I can do it down here in the actual shape layer as well, which I'll show you after a bit. But I can make those changes there. So my shape's sitting up here kind of off center. I really want it to be centered, but I want to show you a couple other things here. So, you know, when you work in it, we've all worked in Illustrator, right? We work in Illustrator, Photoshop. You know that they all use center points for all of their shapes. Or an anchor point. After Effects is exactly the same way. Every transform that you apply will happen off of your center point, off of your anchor point. And if you notice, I drew this off center, but by default, After Effects places the anchor point always right in the middle of the composition. So if I want to rotate this square, say I just want to make this square spin in its place, the way it is right now, won't really work because the anchor point's there in the middle of the screen. So when I rotate it, it's going to rotate around that anchor point. I can move that anchor point by coming up here into my toolbar and select this one right here. It says pan behind, but it's also the anchor point tool. Y on the keyboard will also invoke that tool. So I can either select on it here, or I can tap Y on my keyboard. It'll change my cursor. And then I can select that anchor point and drag it up here and center it on the object. I have, looking back up here in the control panel real quick, I have snapping enabled. So there's a check mark in it. I have that enabled so that when I grab this and move it, it'll snap by default to the center, to the edge, to the corner, whatever I'm close to. So I can move that anchor point right up in the middle. Now when I select my rotate, yeah.
Go over that.
Yes. So if I select my anchor point tool, which is this one, or my pan behind, which is also the anchor point tool, I've got snapping enabled. With this tool enabled, I can come down here and select my center point or my anchor point and move it to the middle of the object. Snapping will make sure that it goes to the center. There are other ways to make sure that happens, which we'll look at another time, but that's a simple enough way to do it. So now, part of the reason that I like the standard panel is it keeps some very common tools to the forefront. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab my selection tool, which by the way is V on my keyboard. So if I tap V, that'll grab my selection tool. I'm going to select that. And if I come over here into my right hand set of panels, align should be one of those options. If it's not, you can come up here to the window menu and select the align panel. There are check marks beside anything that's currently available on the screen to us. So this align panel is what I want. I want to align the layers to the composition. Then I'm just going to center it both directions. And I've got all the regular centering options available here. I can center to the left, to the right, or whatever. Yeah.
So my align thing is checked on Windows, but I can't seem to find it
On the right-hand side. So you're using a standard workspace, correct? If you go
Apparently not. How do you change that?
If you
window, workspace.
on the bottom, it's under.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this?
Yep.
It's also like up along the top.
It's also up along the top, or it will be in the standard layout anyway. But you can also go to the window menu to workspace and select the various options as well. All right, so I've got that all centered up. Simple enough. So first thing is that anchor point though. Get into the habit of always knowing where the anchor point for any object you're working on is, because like I said, that affects the animation properties. So if I want to scale this now, I want to scale this from the center out. And if that anchor point's anywhere else, I'm not going to get the effect that I want. So always know where your anchor points are at. Any other questions on that before I move on? All right. So let's come down here to the timeline real quick. So let's take a look. The shape layer, first of all, shape layer by itself isn't that great. If I put a bunch of other shapes in here, I'm going to have a whole bunch of layers named shape layer. Doesn't help me find stuff very easily. So if I select that and just hit return on my keyboard, I can change the name of that. So blue square. Give that a name. And we're going to take a look under this. And for now, I'm going to skip a lot of this other stuff, but we're just going to focus on animating an object in transforms. So this little arrow that's right next to the color cube, if I open that up, you'll see that I've got two different sets of properties available here. The first one, contents, will almost always be different. If it's a shape like this, it'll always be contents. But if you've got a piece of video or a composition, audio, or whatever else, you probably won't have contents, you'll have something else. But what you always will have, no matter what element it is the transform set of options. So let's take a look at contents for this shape first. I'm going to open this up, and basically contents is simply all of the pieces, parts that make up this shape. So it's, remember that these are basically vector shapes. And they work just like Illustrator vector shapes do, where when you draw a shape on screen, you're actually drawing a path. And then you apply a fill to give it form and strokes to give it form. So those are, I teach my Production 1 classes that the path simply identifies the area that can hold any number of things. The appearances are the fill, anything that makes them visible on screen. So when we open this contents, that's exactly what's here. Rectangle, we've got our path, we've got a set of parameters for the stroke, a set for the fill, and then there's some special transform settings for the rectangle path itself, which I'm not going to jump into, but if we take a look, the rectangle path, I've got, I can change size, roundness of the corners, that kind of thing. Stroke is simply all of the common things you'd expect to be able to adjust with the stroke. The width, the color, you can make it, the line cap, a dash, doesn't matter. And then your fill. If say I want this to be just a stroked object with no fill in it whatsoever, we've got this little eyeball out here next to these objects that will hide them. So if I give this a stroke, I'm going to go ahead and make this like 20 points or so. Give it like a gray stroke. If I don't want it to have a fill, all I've got to do is come down here to my fill item and turn that off. I do want it to have a fill, so I'm going to leave it on. But I can make things visible and invisible by toggling the eyeball. And it's nice because this stuff's same as other software you're used to, so that part's all good. So we've got, all of those different things. So got that. Transforms, however, are the way we animate pretty much anything. We're always going to, most of the animation we do will be to adjust either the position of an object, its scale, its rotation, and its opacity, by and large. I would say probably 80% of most of what you do happens within that. And it's not, based upon what you're doing, and you'll use one or more of those for an object. We're going to do multiples here. But if I open this transform panel, you'll see that there's settings for the anchor, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. So those are what we're going to animate. And I'm going to focus for right now on scale. So remember that, my original idea for this animation is this cube is actually going to just sort of pop into existence and then settle into its final state. When I drew the size of this, that's the size I wanted its final state to be. It doesn't have to be that way. I can change that later on if I want. But to keep things simple, that's the way I did it. So I've got this shape and it's selected. I'm going to adjust the scale on it. Anytime I want to animate, well, there's two different ways to animate. I shouldn't say anytime we want to animate. we can either sequence images, which we're going to actually do. We can sequence images, which is kind of like stop motion, if you will, where you've got a still image and you sort of stagger them by maybe 4 or 5 frames so you get that jerky kind of emotion. And then there's also basically point-to-point animation. Well, so referring back to our principles of animation, point-to-point is what I'm going to do here. I know where I want my object to start. I know where I want it to end. And I know that there's a size in the middle that I want to be different. So it's going to be, so my progression here is going to be, it's not going to be on screen at all, so I'm going to scale this to 0. My final position of it's going to be 100% of size, which is exactly what I'm looking at. And then I'm going to want to have an intermediate shape where it's bigger because it's going to pop in and then settle into place. All right? So let's start this by, I'm going to work backwards actually, which I do this a lot because I know where I want to end up. So I'm going to start there. So I'm going to come out here to about, and I'm going to purposefully come out here pretty far to like 5 seconds. And I'm pulling my playhead out. If you notice, I pulled that little blue playhead out right to there. And I'm going to set that this is where the cube is going to rest finally. So if I come over here and look at my transforms, you'll notice that all through this interface, there are these little stopwatches. That's how I identify objects that I want to animate and set my keyframes on them. So anything you see within this interface that has a stopwatch next to it, you can animate, which is darn near absolutely everything. So I want my final keyframe to be here. I'm going to come down here to my scale, and I'm just going to click on this stopwatch. Turns blue. And you'll notice out here on my timeline where my playhead is, it puts a little diamond. That's my keyframe. So for scale, that keyframe says that it's going to be 100% of its original size. All right? So I'm going to jump back over here real quick. If you notice, whenever I had all of these different windows open, or all these different options, this list started really getting kind of long and I had to scroll through it. We can control some of that. If I close up this transform panel and I tap, I'm just working with scale for right now. If I tap the S key on my keyboard, it'll present me with just my scale parameter. If I tap the P key, it'll show me just the position parameter, where it's positioned on the screen. R for rotate, A for my anchor point, will allow me to select the anchor point. And the only one that doesn't follow that nice, neat little first letter kind of a thing is opacity, because O is something else. So they use T for transparency for that one. So I can toggle between all of my different, so I've got scale up right now, but I could, jump over to my opacity, to my position, and work on those individual parameters. So S for scale, and my keyframe sits out here. Select my object again. Select scale. So there's that keyframe. So that's where it's going to end. And I'm just going to pull my playhead all the way back across now to the very beginning. And I want it to start at 0. So I've already set in motion the fact that I'm setting keyframes now. So I can either scale this down with my select tool. I could click on, grab a corner, hold my shift key and scale this down. Or under scale, I can actually change the percentage of scale. So with this little link enabled, if I change one of these 100% to 0%, and then click out of it, it'll change them both to 0. And it didn't delete my object, it just scaled it to 0. So now if I grab my playhead and I scrub this along, it grows into existence. And if I want to play that animation, and all I got to do is tap the space bar on my keyboard, and it'll play it through. This is pretty slow. We're going to remedy that. But keeping everything kind of evenly spaced here so that we can easily find stuff. All right, so I set my starting point. I set my end point. 2 poses. I'm going to come back in here in the middle somewhere, and I'm just going to pick about 3.5 seconds, something like that. If you're not using the same time values that I am, that's fine. I'm a little past halfway. Here, remember that I want this 0 to big and then settle back into its final position. So this needs to be bigger than everything else. So I'm just going to place my playhead, my keyframe, or my playhead there, come back over here, and I'm going to change 70 to, let's see what 150 gives me. Let's see what 200 gives me.
How did you get your timeline to like zoom into the smaller increments?
You can actually zoom into smaller increments if you pull the scale bar. I didn't. This is just natural time. Did you set your composition at, this is set to like 15 or 5 seconds, I think? 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just goes much as 1 to 2 to 3 to 4.
It goes from, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that may just have to do with, the screen resolution and whatnot. It'll adjust a little bit. If you want to zoom into half seconds though, just go to this little magnification bar right here, go to the end of it and drag it in, and that'll change the view. I mean, I'm using hard measurements only just to give you something to work from. I hardly ever do that. I pick spots, I rough everything in, and then I visually make my decisions as to where things go from there. So anyhow, at this point, 200%, that's probably pretty good. So now when I scrub this through, it gets big, and then it drops back into position. So, in a very raw, uninteresting, slow, boring kind of a way, there's my initial, that's the motion that I'm going to have. The timing's all way off. It's not even anywhere near close. But I've at least got everything kind of put together. So, and this is kind of what I mean about, kind of breaking things down into easy to sort of manage chunks, especially early on, you know? Yeah.
Are you able to click on the little diamonds at the bottom and drag them to make them like?
I sure can. Absolutely. So, which kind of brings us to the next thing. Like I said, far too long, right? Takes far too long. So, nothing ever happens over a period of seconds, unless some things do. But this shape, in all honesty, is only going to be a second long when I'm done entirely. So, all I got to do is click on these keyframes and drag them. And I can change. And I'm going to kind of try to keep them spaced the way I had it before. So now if I play through, that's a little quicker and a little bit better. Still kind of slow. But the other thing I can do here is, if I select all of these keyframes at once, hold down my Option key, and click on the very last one and drag it, well, I gotta actually click on it. Click on the last one and drag it, I can proportionally scale all those keyframes as well. So I want to scale that down to a second. So from beginning to end now, instead of 5 seconds, this is only going to last a second. And that's a little better. Still not great, but we're getting there, creeping up on it. So I'm really only going to work on this 1 second time span. I don't want to see all this other stuff. And every time I hit my space bar to preview it, yeah.
What was the button that you pressed the proportion we changed?
Oh, to do all three of them together at once? The Option key?
Option.
Yeah, hold on the Option key and then click the very last keyframe and drag it. Every time I hit my space bar, I don't want to play this entire thing. So I'm going to actually grab the trim bar and drag it down in here close. And then I want to kind of magnify this a little bit. I don't need to magnify it too much, but why look at a bunch of stuff I don't need? So something like that. Where I move these things to, they're just good ways to sort of manage your workspace. We're still kind of focusing on our keyframes here though. So if I play that through, it pops in. It's not too bad. We'll get it better. So it's really kind of boring right now. It just kind of very linearly grows and then shrinks a little bit at a very even rate across that time frame. That's linear. So this animation is entirely linear at this point, meaning that, remember that every single frame is basically a still. So if there's a still image, there's a still image, everything happens at an even rate all the way through. And I always know that these are linear because these keyframes are diamond shaped. So as long as they're diamonds, they're linear keyframes. So if you remember from our principles of animation, we like to sort of ease stuff into a position and ease it back out again, slow in, slow out. A car, when it speeds up to a stop sign, doesn't speed up and stop, or doesn't drive through and just stop on a dime. It zooms up and it slows into it, right? We're going to do the same kinds of things because almost every motion does some variation on that. So this thing grows and then settles back into place. And most things at the height of at the apex of the motion, which really the scale, that's what that would be, is the apex of the motion, they tend to slow down. So we're going to ease in to this keyframe and then we're going to ease back out of it. And the way I do that is I'm just going to select the individual keyframe. Let's get that out of the way. Select the keyframe. If I hold down my control key, this is the easiest way to do it, I think. If I hold down hold down my control key and click on it, I get a pop-up. And this contextual menu will give me I can edit the value of the scale value here, because remember, we're just working in the scale. I'm gonna go down here to the bottom to the keyframe assistant, and we've got three options: easy ease in, and easy ease out. The difference between these three is that we're making our decision based upon the keyframe that we're using. So if I want to ease into a keyframe, this is my stop point. If I want to ease into that really slowly, I want to ease in is going to be the option that I make, the choice that I make. If I've got a keyframe I want to slowly leave and then speed up to the next one, I'm going to ease out of the initial keyframe. The keyframe I'm working on kind of is dependent, or the choice that I make is dependent upon the keyframe I'm working on. I'm working on one that's in the middle. So I actually want to ease into that keyframe and I want to ease back out of it again. And that's what easy ease is. Just a simple little easy ease one. I can also hit F9 on my keyboard for that, Shift F9, and Shift Command F9 for each of those different options. So anytime you pick something, pay attention to the keyframe, the keyboard shortcut. They just kind of speed things up. So I'm going to do easy ease here. And notice now that my keyframe changed shapes. Looks like an hourglass. Basically, that's an arrow into that point and an arrow back out of it. Yeah.
Could you go over how you got to that hourglass again?
Mm-hmm. So select the keyframe, hold down my control key, click on the keyframe, and then go to the bottom of it, to the keyframe assistant, and you'll make the selection that you want. There you go. So, also notice when I'm going to do that again. So watch the size of my cube. Remember, this is scale. And whenever we ease things in and ease them out, when we ease in, we put keyframes closer together. So we're kind of stretching out the ones at the beginning and shortening up the ones at the end. But the scale of this is going to change based upon the value of this keyframe. So Control, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And now, when I play this through, that's a little more fluid kind of emotion, a little more natural. It slows when it gets into that largest scale, and then it eases back down into the final one. So it's a little more interesting than the linear one we had before. And every change we make from this point on out is going to make it more interesting. Need to do I'll do the easing thing again here several times. So, but anything else there before I move on from that? All right. I also think it kind of clunks into position here. I'd like it for it to settle in a little softer. So I'm going to select this end keyframe, hold down my Control key, and I want to ease into that. So I want Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease in. So it lands a little softer. It's not quite as hard as it did before. All right. And I could probably do something here if I wanted to, but I think the way it comes onto frame, I kind of like that. I think it works. So I'm not going to worry about it. But now to Lana's earlier point about clicking on keyframes and moving them around, I gave this one kind of a feel, but if I grab this keyframe here, let's move it closer to this end. That's a much different feel. Pops in quicker and eases in slower. If I grab this and move it all the way, down here close to the end one, it a little more rubber band-like, if you will, Just by moving keyframes around, I've kind of given this a different feel and a different personality. It's a little more rubbery here. Pull it out, snap it into place, But out here, we sort of zoom in and then we just sort of settle. So we're going to kind of find a position that we like with this. I'm going to go back to the position that I had. That's kind of what I was going for anyway. It's a little much. All right. So that's our first set of animations. It's pretty simple. Not a whole lot. I mean, we just basically set our keyframes and adjust them to get the look we want. And this is kind of why I look at things over and over again, because I set my keyframes and it's like I kind of search for that sweet spot, that look, that feel that I really like, So I just kind of move things around. I mean, after, as long as I've done it, I kind of know instinctively where to go to find things, but sometimes you're just kind of looking for a different feel and you just play with it that way. I mean, tinkering around with things is the best way to see what you're going to get. So even when I think I know what I want, I'll still try different things. Just maybe I stumble on something I like even better, I mean, Bob Ross's Happy Accidents, So, but we've animated a pretty simple shape there. Scale by itself, to me, isn't all that interesting. We can layer different we've still got 5 other transforms we could apply to this thing, so why don't we? So, it's scaling out of nothing. Oops, grabbed the wrong thing. It's scaling out of nothing, but maybe I want it to be maybe I want it to be sort of, let's mess with the opacity a little bit. Maybe I want it to kind of fade into existence at the same time. So so I know that I'm about a second long here, so with my shape, I'm just going to tap the T key on my keyboard for opacity. And, you know, the keyframes that I was just working on that I just set were only for scale. So if I actually open these all back out, you'll see that that's the only one that's blue. All the rest of them are still gray. So if I want to work with my opacity here, I'm just going to set my playhead at the very beginning, and I'm going to hit that stopwatch, turn it blue, and I want to set my initial opacity to 0. And then I want to come out here to, I know my animation is a second long, so I'm going to come out here to 1 second, and I want to change this value to 100%. I can also adjust, I forget if I mentioned it. If I did, forgive me. But I can also change this value by hovering over top of it, clicking, and dragging one way or the other. So there's that 100%. So now, whenever I play this through, I've introduced that opacity into it. So it's a little grayish when it starts, you know, a little bit of, gives it a little bit of atmospheric perspective, you know? So I've got keyframes, just 2 keyframes, and I'm actually, you know, I can ease my opacity too. It depends on what I'm looking for. I'm actually going to adjust the way this looks a little bit more right at the moment though, by, let's do that. I'm going to adjust where the opacity starts. So it's going to be transparent up until a little later. So that changes the look of my animation a bit. I didn't change my scale at all, but by introducing opacity, I kind of changed the look and feel of that some. Maybe I wanted to still be, I mean, I could pull the full opacity all the way out here and see what I get. So there's a little bit of secondary action happening there, a little bit of an overlapping kind of a thing where it's not fully opaque yet when the scale animation finishes, but the rest of it comes in. All depends on what you want, what you're looking for. Maybe I have it be fully opaque earlier. I mean, so I could kind of move those around. Add a little bit of new dimension to it. Kind of works. One of the things I find a lot of times is when you animate everything to exactly the same keyframe. So if my scale begins at 0 and it ends at 1 second, my opacity starts at 0 and it ends at 1 second. The rotation I'm going to put into it here next, when it starts at 0 and it ends at 1 second, that kind of predictability also kind of makes things a little bland. And by adjusting the timing on all of those things, we add more and more interest to the things that we're doing. So it's another reason I kind of play around with things a little bit. I'm actually going to make, it's going to be barely noticeable, but I'm going to pull that out to about there. So let's toss a little bit of rotation into this as well. Maybe whenever it pops forward, it rotates a bit, and then it rotates back and settles into position. So I'm going to add, with that, I'm going to tap the R key on my keyboard and set my first keyframe. What I'm going to do is it's going to start on 0. It's going to rotate out at its highest point, and then it's going to rotate back into place. So I got a keyframe there, and I know that I want to have a keyframe whenever, or I want it to be the same position whenever it falls back into its final spot. So I'll set my keyframe there, and if I come over here to set a keyframe there without changing anything, I want to come over here to the very end of this layer, and you'll see this little dot. If I click on that, that'll add a keyframe. I can also add a keyframe with the K key, I think. I'm almost moving stuff. Always moving stuff, so I don't do that very often. But so now when I'm at the highest point, I'll just kind of eyeball it right here. I'm just going to grab my rotate tool, grab him, and spin him around just a little bit. And that'll set a keyframe right there. It'll set the keyframe wherever my playhead is. So now when this pops in, a little more life. It makes sense that we should probably ease into that position. So on that center keyframe, select it, hold down my control key, click on it, keyframe assistant, and I'm going to easy ease there just like I did with my scale. Times it. Okay. So that's not too bad. I mean, you know, and I can try what happens if I grab this keyframe, this rotation keyframe, and I pull it back here. Yeah. I was happier with it back here. Maybe I'll adjust this one a little bit, pull it out. No, no. I also learn real quick what I don't like whenever I do that. Yeah, there we go. And then I'm going to ease that rotation back in here too. So select that keyframe, hold the control key, keyframe assistant. I'm going to ease into that last keyframe. So there's our basic animation. We can slide these things around, try some different stuff. But if I go back here and I open up all my transforms, those are the three that I modified. So that's good. And we're going to leave this animation at that. We can make further adjustments to it later if we want, but let's go ahead and I'm going to save it. So next thing I want to do is, though, I want to use this shape animation, this square animation, in my main composition, my main animation. And what I'm actually going to do is, I'm going to use this exact same composition 3 different times, and I'm going to change when it pops in without modifying this animation at all. So when I say bite things off in small chunks, this is kind of what I'm talking about. I know I want this cube to animate a certain way, but I want to use it multiple times. So I create that little animation so that the things I do with it from here on don't affect the original set of things that I did. So, so I've got this animation, and we are, let's see, what did I do? All right, so we're a little over a second. So I'm going to leave this at 10 seconds because I don't know precisely yet what I want to do. One thing to remember, I've got a black background here, but if I toggle my transparency grid, this is actually a transparent background. It just is black on my screen just to give me a working space. It is transparent. So I'm actually going to leave that transparent just so it's easier to look at. But I'm going to go over here to my main animation now. So you open your main animation from here, or it's already open down here as a tab on your timeline. If it's down here, I'll just select it. And I want to place my animated square into this composition. So I'm going to select my animated square and just drag it down here into my main animation. And there it is. So like I said, I want to do 3 of these. Yeah. I'm going to do 3 of these. So I know the animation starts at the very beginning, which is another good practice to get into. I like to keep my animations loaded up to the front of the composition rather than I'll get files from people sometimes that it's like a 30-second long composition piece and the animation sits in the middle of it, which is kind of maddening because now I've got to slide that around and figure out where the heck the animation is. I can't really tell, but because I can't see any of the keyframes from this animated square here. It's just at this point it's a piece of video, if you will. So I've got that. Let's do something other than a black background here real quick though. If I go up here to my layer panel and do a new layer, I'm going to grab a solid. And basically a solid is going to create a shape that fills my composition area. So I can make it orange. I'm actually going to switch it to like a light blue, a bluish gray. That. So now my background is actually that color. And remember, this is a layered system, so I actually have to pull this down below my animated square. It's actually kind of, that's all right. We'll leave it light. All right. So I got this pale cyan solid. Notice whenever I create a solid though, it actually creates a folder in my project window. And if I open it up, there's that solid. So I can use that over and over again in other compositions within this project if I want to. If it's a brand color, for my client, then I can use that one over and over again. So, all right. So let's do something else with this. So this is going to pop in like that. I don't want it to be right in the middle though. So I'm just going to select, grab my selection tool, V on my keyboard, grab this animated square, and I'm just going to slide it to the left. And remember, I want 3 of them. So I'm just going to, I can either drag this back from up here back down into my timeline, or I can select this, Command D on my keyboard will duplicate it. So there's another copy of it. And this one I'm going to pull over to the middle. And I'm going to make a third one. So from that one, I'm going to hit Command D again. And I want to slide it to the right. Yeah.
How did you get the background to go behind the squares? Because mine popped up in front of them.
So your solid is on the top.
Yeah.
Just click on it and drag it to where you want it to be. Just rearrange it in order. So if I play that real quick, I got 3 cubes that come in together and do the same thing. And I'm actually going to trim this down again to like 2 seconds. Now let's do 3 seconds, 4 seconds. So these all come in at the same time. But what if I want to stagger them? What if I don't want them to come in at the same time? My first one will come in. I'm going to select the second one that I put down, and I'm just going to grab this brown bar and slide it to the right. Let's go to I want to go to a second, or half a second, 12 frames. And then I'm going to grab the third one, and I want to do the same thing. Grab that brown bar and slide it across to a second. So now, it's the same animation that plays, but it happens at different points of my main animation timeline. I didn't make any changes in timing to my cube, but I changed when that animation appears within my main animation. Bless you. So that's easy and simple enough, right? So that's a simple enough animation. What if I want the middle one maybe to be smaller? I can adjust that too. And I'm not setting any keyframes to do this. I'm just modifying the composition itself. If I grab the middle one, and actually I should probably name these. So animated, even though they already have names, animated square, I can still extend that name of them. This is the center. Right. Just so I know which is which. I'm going to grab the center one, and I'm going to scale it down. To be entirely honest, this is all kind of slow. It could probably be a little quicker, but for purposes of what we're doing, but again, this process of creating compositions and nesting them inside of other compositions is it's a general best practice, for building out animations. Sometimes you'll have compositions inside of compositions inside of compositions. You can nest them as deep as you want to nest them. There's really no limit. But we're going to try to keep the nesting to a minimum. We're going to nest stuff, but we'll try to kind of keep it to a minimum, I think. So, any questions about what I did here when I kind of composed this final piece? So this was kind of this is a 10-second composition. I trimmed it down to 4 seconds because, that's really all we have time to do. And I want to show you rendering real quick and then give you time to work. So anything there you want to see again, or? I purposely skipped over a bunch of different things, but yeah.
Is there a way to change the color of the background without deleting it and making a new layer?
Yeah, there is. So if you select your solid down here and go up to your layer menu, there's a solid settings option, the second from the top. Select that, and you can change that color. Yep. All right. So doing all of our animation work inside of the software is great, but basically nobody will ever be able to see it unless we render it. And so that's what we'll do next. Every project you do in After Effects, when you're done, you're going to render the final output. You're going to upload it to your Google Drive. You'll also put it on your YouTube or Vimeo channel or whatever it is you're using. But there are 2 different ways to animate out of After Effects. And they are straight out of After Effects itself, which is easy enough. And on short little animations, especially like this, is perfectly good. When you have bigger compositions, say you've got a 2-minute long title sequence with a lot of effects, maybe some 3D cameras and some 3D content, that kind of thing. Those will take a long time to render. So if you're rendering straight out of After Effects, I've had 15 to 20 minute renders before. I've got a friend that had to wait overnight on renders, but I've never really made anything that big. But I mean, you know, if it's going to take 10 to 15 minutes to render, that's 10 to 15 minutes you can't do other work within After Effects, you know? So that's where Media Encoder comes in. Media Encoder basically writes it to a file, writes the animation to a file, sends it to Media Encoder, and then Media Encoder you can set that to render whenever you want to. Doesn't even have to be right then. You can even load Media Encoder up with 20 animations if you want to, and render them all at the same time if you don't want to tie up your processor and, you know, really slow things down. So there's those two different ways. So we're going to render this. I purposefully trimmed this down to about 4 seconds because a 10-second animation would have been, it doesn't do anything after this point, so I could probably actually trim this down to 3 seconds. Maybe I'll do that. Whatever I trim this work area down to, though, is what will be rendered. So if the trim area extends all the way out to the end, it'll do the whole composition. If you've only got the trim area narrowed down to, say, 3 seconds, like I do, it'll only render this 3 seconds. So we've done that. Let's go ahead and render it. So to render it out of After Effects, we're going to go to the composition panel. And down here, we've got our 2 rendering options. Add to the Media Encoder queue, which we'll do second, or add to the render queue. And I'm just going to do add to the render queue. So I'll select that, and you'll see down here in my timeline, it adds a tab for render queue. And here is my project rendering. The only things we really need to concern ourselves with most of the time is we're always going to leave this the best settings. We always want the best render we can. H.264 match rendering, 15 megs a second, is pretty standard for an MP4 file. We're going to leave that alone. The only time we ever really change that is there are times whenever you want to render an animation, like maybe my initial cube animation with a transparent background. Maybe I want to render that as a .mov file with transparent background. It's the only way to do that. So I'd make a change there then. But generally speaking, we want to render what we're looking at on screen. So we're going to leave that alone. Output 2, main animation, is always going to pick up the title of your composition. And if I want to make sure that I know where it's saving this to. So I'm just going to click, whenever I hover over it, it highlights. I'm going to click on that. And I can see that this is going to, where am I? Bless you. I'm at an odd angle. Does that, the highlighted one say renders? Okay, cool. So I added a folder to my project folder called renders to put all my renders into. So renders is where I want to save this to. You'll navigate on your hard drive wherever you need to navigate to. It's like saving any other file. So let's make sure that's selected, hit return, and then it won't render until I come over here and tap the render button on the top right. I can also queue it directly into Media Encoder. I'm just going to render it. So we'll do, yeah.
Once you render it, I forget if you mentioned, can you go back and change it? Or is it like set in stone? And
Oh no, I mean, you can render it over and over as many times as you need to. So you render it, you see something you don't like, you go back, you make the change, and you re-render it. Yeah.
What does rendering do?
What does it do?
Yeah.
It actually writes it, so right now this is an After Effects file, and it'll only play and you can only ever see it inside of After Effects. Rendering it out will actually create an MP4 file that you can then send to somebody and you can view in QuickTime, you can view a media player, upload to YouTube or whatever else. It basically creates a video file.
Okay.
So that's rendered. Let's pop over here to my renders folder. Here's my main animation. And if I open this with QuickTime Player, and I can send that to my mom and show her the animation I did. So it's a simple animation, but kind of takes you from the very beginning all the way to the very end. So, like I said, you'll never ever turn in an After Effects file. I always want to see the final render. I mean, I can tell absolutely everything I need to know from the final render. As far as, we got to know the software in order to create these things. But for as much as this is all about software, it's also about developing an eye and a feel for timing and technique and that kind of thing. So it's a two-pronged kind of a thing.
Does After Effects have like cloud saving? So then if you work on it on one computer, you can work on it.
It does not have cloud saving, no. Which is why, save it to your laptop or whatever, or, cloud storage, always make sure you back up a copy of your work. That's the other thing. Most everybody never listens to me, but I say it anyway. Always make sure you're backing up your work. Always, always, always make sure you're backing up your work, because that one time it's 2 days from the project being due and you go to open your file and After Effects just closes straight up on you and won't open the thing, really, really sucks. It's horrible. So there are some troubleshooting things we can do around that we'll look at. Troubleshooting is part of working with After Effects, unfortunately. But always make backups of your work files. Whether it's, whether you're doing cloud storage in Google Drive, whether you've got an external hard drive you save everything off to, doesn't really matter to me, as long as you're backing stuff up. Always have a copy after every work session. You really, truly realize how important it is when you lose something. So usually you can't appreciate it until that point. But anyway, always make sure you're backing things up. All right? Let's do Media Encoder really fast, and then I'll let you work. So Media Encoder will do all the same things, but like I said, we'll save it outside of After Effects. So this time to render it, instead of going to Render Queue, I'm going to go to Adobe Media Encoder queue, and it's quite simply, usually when this starts up the first time, it's a little bit slow, but you see that Media Encoder was already open, popped right up, and here's one I rendered earlier. Here's the one I want to render now. And this is a little nicer because it gives me the path that it's outputting to. But when you're ready, you can stack a bunch of different files up here to render and not render them. When you're ready, you just go up here to the top corner to this green play button, click on that, and it'll render out your animation. So we'll do that again. But those are the two ways to render. So simple little animation. All right. So that is all I have for that. Any questions? Any other questions? A lot more questions here, which is, I like when people ask